We are really delighted, Senators Young and Booker, to have you with us. As Shai indicated, the topic of emergency savings is not a casual interest. Back in 2016, we had a commission on financial security that delved into this issue. We had Kent Conrad and Jim Lockhart and business leaders and labor leaders, and it was a good scrum. And we put out some great recommendations, and nobody cared, right? They sat there for 2 years until you guys came along in 2018. And just so the public understands this, you met with your constituents, you did the research, you reached out to your colleagues, you brought in interest groups, you drafted legislation, you redrafted legislation. You actually did what has to happen to lead the country to solve real problems. And so it's just a delight to have you with us. And now I'd like to talk about it. I want to talk a little bit about just the why, talk about the legislation, and then if we have time, maybe the prospects. And I guess I'll kick it off to you, Senator Booker, on the why. So you guys from different states, different parties, different geographies, different interests. Why'd you get together on this thing? I mean, what was it about this issue that really motivated you to get started and connect with Senator Young?
First of all, thanks for giving Senator Young and I this privilege of being on the same show as we have as the great Susie Orman. It's tremendous, and I'm a big fan of hers. Her practical insights have been benefiting me for years. And then, of course, I just want to thank the Bipartisan Policy Center and Funding Our Future. You all have been incredible and really represent the spirit that I want to live here in the United States Senate, which is looking for common ground, reaffirming the sense of common purpose we have in America, despite whatever political difference we might have. And Todd Young is one of those colleagues that I really deeply appreciate. I'm so grateful for a lot of the work he and I have done together, a lot of benefits I've had, and we both serve on the Foreign Relations Committee, just being with him and seeing his focus internationally. But here on this issue, I'm grateful to have him as a partner here domestically. And I think he and I both realize how vulnerable we are as a society, not having people being able to withstand just what some people might call an emergency, but these unpredictable expenses that often come up, whether it's car trouble, a visit to the emergency room, a water leak at home, these kind of things that can happen. Most Americans can't deal with more than a $400 expense. And that really makes us economically vulnerable. It makes our society more vulnerable. It could create really rough economic spirals for families who are doing everything right. And it's really an alarming crisis. It's an alarming crisis, especially because so many Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. And also a lot of Americans just don't have that kind of savings. In fact, he and I are both ex-gens folks, and we both are part of a generation that compared to any other generation has the least amount of even retirement savings. So we have these economic crises waiting to be triggered. And this is one of those ways that we can address that by incentivizing the kind of savings that can make us all more economically resilient, economically strong, and stave off that having an economic emergency turns into an economic disaster for a family.
That's a great entry. So Senator Young, I'd like to hear just a little bit about you, like your experience with your constituents. And, I think we all focus, this has been an issue for America for, 250 years, but the pandemic kind of brought some different kinds of attention to it. And I wonder if you could just talk about how you saw that play out in Indiana, how that's changed the arc of the discussion.
Well, thank you so much. I thank the Bipartisan Policy Center as well for hosting this event, for your thought leadership, as we learned about just how grave the emergency savings deficit is in this country. And of course, it relates very directly to our longstanding concerns about insufficient savings for retirement. And, for me, this is about everything that Corey just discussed, which is one of the reasons I've really enjoyed working with Corey on this and many other issues. But it's also the lack of emergency savings in particular, a source of great frustration and even stress, daily stress for a lot of my constituents, regardless of their income level, across rural, urban, divides, black, white, Republican, Democrat. It really doesn't matter. There needs to be more attention paid to the emergency savings challenges in this country and more tools given to rank and file Americans, which is what we're trying to accomplish here. So to the extent we can eliminate that stress by providing a very flexible instrument to businesses, which is historically where so many Americans are used to preparing for retirement, we try and also prepare them for the unforeseen crisis, which is inevitable in most of our lives, but very difficult to prepare for oftentimes. We wanted to do this. You know, brass tacks, my individual visits with constituents is supported by data. The more I started to marinate in some of the facts out there gathered by the Bipartisan Policy Center and others, I learned that Corey and I and so many others were onto something. When you have 2 out of 5 Americans who have absolutely no emergency savings whatsoever, and roughly 1/3 of Americans who can't cover the cost of unexpected cost of a $400 expense, not a whole lot of money. As we emerge from the pandemic and experience inflation challenges, these crises only grow more acute. And I think the time is now for us to act and set Americans up for success in the future as they try and prepare for their own emergencies and their own retirement.
We're going to dig into the legislation in a minute, but Senator Booker, I wonder if you could speak a little bit about the broader ramifications for the economy. So as you pointed out, there are lots of people living on the edge, one broken ankle or broken roof away from just having their whole economics unravel. I know we don't have CBO scoring on that dynamic question, but how do you feel like this affects just basic workforce and our ability to kind of have a engaged society that is not dependent upon the government for too much of its basic survival?
Yeah, look, when I was a mayor of the city of Newark, my mentor mayor was Mike Bloomberg. And I still remember him so saying, "God we trust, but everybody else bring me data." And I just, the right left of Washington, when I was a mayor, I was just trying to fix stuff, make things work, create opportunity. And what we were stunned with when we looked at a lot of the data is often we saw people getting evicted from their housing for just a few $100s. They were literally losing their housing. But the cost to us as taxpayers were many multiples of that in terms of suddenly their dependency on a lot of things, or they're ending up in our emergency rooms or engaged with our police. And that's something our society hasn't really taken into effect. When people, every dollar we spend getting a child above the poverty line saves about $5 for the economy overall. And so creating, as I think Senator Young said so wisely, an instrument that we know this from 401ks and more that has sort of an automatic enrollment opportunity will create people that will be insulated, not just to costs to their families, but costs that often, if they spiral economically or face real economic disaster, issues that spiral out and affect all of us as taxpayers. We are better in this economy when people are doing better in this economy, and success, wealth, opportunity bleeds into every area. We saw this with this remarkable period of economic growth from the time my dad was a teenager in the 1940s after the post-war period to around the time I was coming into being in the 1970s. We had this powerful explosion of economic opportunity. Median income in the United States more than doubled. And it just had a ripple effect throughout our entire economy. We have got to start finding ways to have the average American have a better economic experience than they're having right now. And these are the kind of mechanisms and tools that not just empower people and help them to invest responsibly, but it's also, I think, the tools that could save us from a lot of the challenges we're still facing in this economy of families in economic crisis, or even just, as I think Senator Young said so well, the constant stress, economic stress that a lot of families are over, that cortisol constantly pumping into their veins as they worry about will they have enough money at the end of their month, or they're going to find themselves with too much month at the end of their money.
Jason, if I could just extend Corey's remarks. As he spoke, I thought of yet another value proposition of giving rank and file Americans the tools to prepare for their own future emergencies. And, there's an old adage that it's expensive to be poor. Increasingly, as the cost of goods and services go up, it's becoming more expensive for middle-class Americans. to buy the regular things they need to fix their car, to fix their house, perhaps. And so in the absence of certainty about the need for future money for an emergency, they hold back. They'll pay for a short-term fix, and that costs them more money in the longer term. So if instead we can give them the tools here to prepare for those crises, they will live with less stress, less cortisone going throughout their circulatory system, as Corey indicated, but also we can enhance their economic welfare as consumers, which is something that's, I think, really accessible to all Americans.
The idea of living with confidence, I think, is makes a lot of sense. So while you're talking a little bit about the role of individuals, well, there's a kind of a governing philosophy behind here that is not new to my conversations with you. This is a little bit more of a nudge than a mandate. It seems like it's very much focused on kind of inspiring innovation. But just talk to us about the role of governments and how you see that kind of underpinning the premise of the bill.
Well, one of the things that I think is important about this bill, as it relates to the role of government, is it provides flexibility. We stay away from mandates. We try and provide tools so that employers can go out there and figure out how to best attract and retain their own employees while continuing to make a buck, which is, of course, essential to their purpose and their continuity. So how is that constructed in the bill itself? Well, this whole effort to set up an emergency savings account, which is something that we allow to be stood up by employers alongside an existing 401k account, that's an optional sort of decision from an employer. It's also optional, giving employers a choice whether or not what they establish the limit all the way up to $2,500 of that account to be. So we give them a choice whether or not to auto-enroll their employees. We've seen great success from auto-enrollment into retirement accounts. We leverage that dynamic and auto-enroll employees if they and their employer agree into an emergency savings account. But once again, that too is an option for the employer to implement if they so choose. And then, this is not Hotel California. So if you enter into this situation and for whatever reason, either your employees or the employer aren't entirely happy with it and don't feel like they can adjust how the program works for their employees, they can exit this program as well. That ought to alleviate any concern that any of my colleagues might have about implementing this solution, but also once it's operationalized, should alleviate a lot of concerns that folks will have about adopting the solutions we help create.
So just an educational moment for the 20-year-olds on my staff. There was a band called the Eagles. In the 1970s, they had a song called Hotel California. The key line was, check in anytime you want, but you can never leave. That was the reference that Senator Young was.
It's so sad that that's becoming increasingly obscure, but thank you.
I had a colleague ask me what AC/DC meant, and so we'll get there. Senator Booker, talk just a little more about the relationship between the retirement and emergency savings ideas. So there's been a little pushback early on. People felt like this was going to be competing. It was going to be pulling money out. It was going to kind of complexify the situation. Talk about how you've kind of arranged that that dynamic so that they really work together.
Well, I still think we have a massive retirement crisis in this country, especially, as I said, the generation that knows about the Eagles and knows about AC/DC, that this is the first generation that's really going to be a part of the society when we shifted from defined benefit to defined contribution. And we have this retirement bubble that could be exploding. We need to find common sense, bipartisan ways to get some ways to address that issue. But look, this is a very smart thing to do when you recognize what kind of havoc we are seeing in our country in terms of just the economy, the kitchen table economics, that we don't have enough insulation from what happens every day. Stuff happens. People have an accident. People have to go out from work. There are a lot of ways that I think we could use incentive voluntary programs to create outcomes. In fact, government has been doing it for a very long time, from our prison systems, which incentivize the right kind of behavior, right kind of engagement, all the way to a lot of our tax code that now creates savings incentives like 527s and more to help people prepare. But this is really one that we should be speaking a lot more, Frank, about. We have a nation that we need to do more for the average American worker. I'm one of these folks that, hey, I want people to do wealth, to have wealth and survive and have that kind of economic insulation. But there are too many now that are more economically vulnerable. We're a nation since 1978 that the average CEO pay has gone up 1,332%. The average worker pay in that same period has only gone up 18%. And so the average workers are really facing this time, not just of income disparity. I mean, CEO pay has gone up wildly more than even the stock market has. But the average worker is facing more and more tough economic headwinds. And we as a society should figure out, we share values as much as people want to emphasize right and left. You could poll 100 senators and ask them about working people. And I think every one of us would say, we may have disagreements on how to get there, but we all want to see workers get a more fair shake, have more economic strength, more economic security. And I think this is a common sense, low-hanging fruit way to allow people to be insulated from that, from what is becoming increasingly just a tough world for the average worker.
Please.
Could I add just one point about sort of philosophy of government as it relates to this proposal as well? We've learned a lot in the last couple of decades about behavioral economics and how we frame certain decisions. It was a matter of some controversy, many will forget, to auto-enroll employees into their retirement plan. But it turns out employees really like it. It's convenient. It's consistent with their long-term wishes for saving. But they make suboptimal decisions as they would judge the decision when left to make some month-by-month decisions about saving for retirement because of the crisis of the moment, because of impulses that creep in. We still empower, of course, employees to cease their automatic contributions to a retirement plan at any moment they wish, but that auto-enrollment feature has been very powerful and very popular. So we have taken the change in choice architecture, as behavioral economists like to call it, and adapted that concept to the emergency savings accounts. And so I think that's right. I think that's appropriate as it relates to the sort of things we do in government, because it still provides that individual flexibility, just presented in a different and very helpful way.
And I'll just add, we have decided in bipartisan ways to use our tax code to incentivize certain behaviors. These tax expenditures have a cost. This program is going to have a cost to it because when people pull out, there'll be no penalty. We won't get those tax revenues. But most people don't realize this. We use about $600 billion in our tax code every year to provide certain tax breaks and incentives to certain behavior. We decided in this country that we wanted people to be homeowners, and we have a mortgage interest deduction. Well, I support that, but we should understand that most of that $600 billion, including the mortgage interest deduction, is used by the top quintile within our society. The top earners are benefiting from that. One of the reasons why I like this is having an emergency savings account. This is really targeted. The people that are going to use this are not those C-suite executives that have that kind of insulation as their salaries have gone up so much. It's really working class people, middle class folks that need this. So this is using our tax code now to better target it towards working people. And I think that we need to do more of this in using our tax code, not to incentivize people of great wealth to get more wealth, but like the carried interest deduction. I think we should be using our tax code to help people who are doing everything right, working hard, to make the American deal even better for them and help them to engage in financial responsibility, as Susan Orman would say, that are going to further expand their ability to deal with severe financial wins as well as secure retirement for their families.
And Senator, just jumping just a little more right feet on the ground. You're an employee, so what happens, right? Your paycheck is, there's a certain percent, about 3%, I believe, and you can pull it out at any time, or just a little more of the mechanics for, let's say, someone on my staff who's trying to figure out whether they want this to be part of their paycheck.
Yes, so these are after-tax dollars. So it's like a Roth IRA. You're going to have to pay your taxes on the money you put in. You put it into this account, and as you said, as I said earlier, if you have that emergency come up, you could pull it out. Now that account is interest bearing, just like my 401k might be. So, it's going to grow over time. If you look at the average stock market earnings, or however that's invested in a mutual fund or what have you, as my 401k is. And then you could pull it out. And now, just like that Roth IRA, you're not going to pay a penalty by pulling it out. You can use those resources to meet that emergency.
But is it capped $2,500? Senator Young?
Yes, capped at $2,500, and agree with Corey's exposition of how it works, but would also add there's the further incentive, which he may not have mentioned, of the employer match, which goes into the retirement account. So the employee will put money into the emergency savings account, preparing for the near term and very predictable emergency. So they're not going to be part of that, a third of Americans who don't have $400 for an emergency. And then the employee says, I'm going to match you, but I'm going to put it in your retirement account. So almost just preparing for the near-term emergency, you're enhancing your long-term security. So it's really
that's a graceful move. No, I smiled when I saw that in the bill. So I want to just get into a little bit of the politics in the moment. So there's a question about the sidecar versus opting out of the system. And this is a place where we've been talking, and I think my understanding is you're interested in moving both those forwards. But Senator Booker, will you just give the audience a little sense of those two different parts of the program? Or Senator Young?
I'm happy to cover that. So originally, when Corey and I began working on this, we decided to bundle this together in one proposal. Some of your viewers will remember that it was the Rise and Shine Act was part of the proposal, and if I recall the name correctly, there's been a number of iterations, but we split apart two components. So those employers that offer 401ks under this legislation now before us can also offer a sidecar emergency savings account, and it would operate as I just described. But there are a number of employers out there, and I've worked for them, that don't offer 401ks. And so are we just going to leave those employees high and dry? And so Corey and I and our teams are working with BPC and other stakeholders to see if we might give those employees options to save for emergencies as well, and then if they leave that employer, they will have tax advantaged a corpus of money that might be transferred into an IRA or a 401k or what have you. So our effort here, if we can get this to work, and we think we will get sufficient support to do so, is to ensure that every American, regardless of their employer's retirement benefit provisions, will have an opportunity to benefit from this emergency savings effort.
Which will be tremendous, especially just given the fact that we are in a more competitive economic environment in the now, where people are competing over workers. This is yet another incentive for employers to offer. And again, just the urgency of this, we saw a recent study that showed about 60% of Americans have dipped into their retirement savings in the course of a year. So this is something that people clearly have the demand for and are paying a cost on their long-term retirement. And so since most Americans are familiar with having these kind of emergencies and have to dip into that retirement savings, I think this will something will become very popular very quickly, both for the employer as well as for employees who are looking for this sort of kind of support and insulation.
Well, as you point out, and I'll just emphasize, for employers, having a staff that is resilient against minor life interruptions is obviously incredibly important, right? So I think that we see the incentives, as you do, on both sides of that equation. So let's talk a little politics. We're in this thing called the lame duck, which is kind of a remarkable moment in democracy, where people who have retired or lost their elections continue to join together to try to make public policy. And sometimes that allows a lot of things to move forwards in a really bipartisan way. You have tremendous bipartisan support for this idea, but it's part of a larger package, Secure 2.0. And I wonder, maybe Senator Booker, just talk a little bit about what you see as the prospects for Secure 2.0 in the lame duck.
There's a lot of conversations going on right now, a lot of priorities being bounced around. But the benefit of things like this, and I've done common sense economic bills across the aisle before, and I found that no matter which ways the political wind blows, things like what Senator Young and I are doing really are appealing and make sense, especially because I think a lot of my colleagues are fatigued at the partisan gridlock down here and are looking often for common sense solutions that will help everyday Americans. So I'm hopeful that this lame duck, with I think the respect and influence Senator Young has clearly in his Republican caucus, and I believe that these are the kind of things that could appeal on the Democratic side, that perhaps we can get a four-corner deal done in this caucus. But I'm not deterred. Even if it doesn't get done now, regardless of what happens in the next cycle, again, some of the best bills have passed under Republican presidents and Democratic presidents when they are bipartisan of this nature. So again, I'm a prisoner of hope usually, but this time I'm even more bullish on our ability to get something done here.
Senator Young, just go a little deeper. So there's a couple of big pieces of legislation. Where do you imagine? Do you think this is going to pass on its own, or do you think it becomes packaged with something larger?
Well, I think it is likely to passes a larger bill. As we approach year's end, we have a national defense authorization bill to consider. We want to keep government funded. There may be an omnibus sort of grab bag of legislative items as we approach year's end, to include various tax bills. But this is a bill that's been vetted, that's been socialized among people across the political spectrum, that is very popular, and frankly, that so many of us, not just its authors, but those who've been very tangentially related to its development and passage, have promised their constituents that we're going to act on. So it really does make a lot of sense. And I agree with Corey's optimism. He's shown such great leadership in especially attracting and earning support over on the Democratic side of the aisle, but also just articulating the value proposition here. At a time of high inflation, at a time of, frankly, a lot of concern about our nation's fiscal situation, to pass a retirement security, emergency security piece of legislation like this, and let me be clear, the piece of it that Corey and I are speaking to today will cost nothing to taxpayers. That's a pretty important value proposition. Right now, there are the so-called 8 corners. So there are 8 legislative leaders in Congress, for those who want a little more detail as to what's happening. Republican chairman, ranking member on the Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee, chairman and ranking on the Finance Committee, both in the U.S. Senate, and then over in the House, it's the Ways and Means Committee and the Ed and Labor Committee, which have oversight over these. So 8 leaders, all working together to see how they can advance this retirement security legislation, as we have some retiring members that would like to see their provisions in a larger Secure 2.0 bill pass, and see if we might get it done. But if for whatever reason we fall short on account of the calendar, I think as we head into next year, we are going to have divided government. We're going to be searching for things that can actually be accomplished. I would put this very high on the list of priorities and possibilities.
So I'll ask you 1 or 2 more questions, but I'm looking at the queue from our virtual audience, and we've actually addressed a number of these. But I think, Senator Young, one question that kind of just building off of what you just described, the question essentially is from Andrea, and I'll paraphrase. It seems like there's a lot of bipartisan cooperation in the Senate, and then there's some applause hands. But what's been the discussion of this in the House with all of the notions about how slim a majority that's going to be? I mean, what do you actually think that this, as Leader McCarthy, could advance this through a House Republican caucus?
Well, I no longer sit on the House Ways and Means Committee, but I can say, because that's one of the committees that has jurisdiction over Secure 2.0, again, what Corey and I are speaking to, and other retirement security provisions, that's a committee where Republicans and Democrats tend to play very well with one another. And so I'm optimistic about the possibilities there. The late Congresswoman Jackie Walorski, Republican from Indiana, informed me that there was a lot of support for Secure 2.0 a number of months ago before her unfortunate, very tragic passing. So, you know, just informed by that conversation, and with conversations that have occurred with other members of the Indiana delegation, I can tell you that I have tempered optimism about our ability to get something done as we approach year's end, just on account of the calendar. I have high confidence that next Congress we can get Secure 2.0 or some very close variant to that passed.
Right. All right, so we're going to pull one question off the string here for you. And it basically says, hey, this is all great, but what if people just don't have any money? Right? You know, with so many people in this country just going day to day, is this really an option for, you know, tens of millions of Americans?
Yeah, well, first of all, it is an option for tens of millions of Americans. It's not a cure-all to a lot of folks, but it is an incredible option for a lot of folks, and we should focus on that. These aren't mutually exclusive. Just because you're doing this doesn't mean you can't do other things to make work pay in America. So again, I'm like getting wins when you can, finding ways to get good things off the table. And I just want to reiterate what my colleague said, which is so right. Look, we have gotten significant things done in this Congress that people, I think, weren't optimistic about, but bipartisan bills on everything from the PACT Act to help our veterans. Didn't help all veterans, but it helped veterans that were significantly suffering from burn pits and other toxic areas. We got a bipartisan bill on a science bill, investment in science research, the CHIPS Act. And under President Trump, we got big bills done that were bipartisan, like our bill, the First Step Act, helping to reform our criminal justice system, to even opportunity zones, which were investing in fact, brought billions of dollars of new investment into low-income rural and low-income urban areas. And so this is a big step. Now, do I not feel compelled to do more for more people? Yeah, I'm looking at other solutions that we could find. You know, this is why I've been a champion for a long time on what was originally a bipartisan effort in the Senate far before, years before I came here, but child savings accounts as something to create in this country that, again, would empower everybody with capital over time, so that everybody at 18 years old could have, depending on their income, tens of thousands of dollars. It's a baby bond bill. I think empowering people economically should be our mission, and somehow in America, since the 80s till now, we've seen this terrible growth of income disparity, leaving a lot of Americans, as we've already discussed, very vulnerable to what are unfortunately everyday emergencies, a health emergency, an auto accident, or more. We need to begin as a society to think more constructively about how to make the American bargain real for all families. And I think the economic insecurity we have in this country is leading to a lot of mental health insecurity. It's making people make poor choices where they put off medical treatments because they fear they can't afford that, which creates even a greater distress in the future. It's not creating an environment where people are doing things like the common sense savings that Susie Orman was talking about. So I feel that there's a lot more work to do on retirement savings, a lot more work to do on making work pay, a lot more work to do on helping people afford education. But in Congress, I've learned 9 years that things are done often incrementally. And this is a very, very solid step to helping millions of American workers have a little bit more economic financial stability in their lives.
Look, BPC's unofficial tagline is the fierce urgency of pragmatism, which is what we, of course, love you both. So maybe just kind of close this out, give each a last word, talk a little bit like, so when this gets passed, what do you think that, the world looks like in 5 or 10 years, or anything else you'd like to share as we wrap up today's session? Senator Young, you want to lead off?
Well, thank you. I think you find more people with $400 for an unexpected emergency, significantly more. I think you see reduced stress among our workforce on account of that. I think to Susie Orman's presentation, I think you find a lot of Americans who have never really had retirement savings, who figure out that they have a retirement account that their employer is putting money into, and become very encouraged and excited about the possibility of retirement and having some money for themselves, perhaps even to pass on to their kids. I think you see, in short, more short-term and long-term financial stability for regular Americans who, through no fault of their own, and consistent with human nature and the demands of the moment, have never really been offered all the tools that they might have been offered that would allow them to prepare for unforeseen contingencies and a little more stability longer term.
Senator Booker, final word.
Yeah, look, I have a lot of concern. The New York Times did a great article about the American deal and how it's changed from my father's generation to mine. They looked at a janitor that worked for Xerox versus a janitor that works for Apple. The janitor that worked for Xerox had really incredible benefits, a pension. The one that they followed had an employee educational assistance program where the janitor went to work every day and she worked really hard, but went to school at night, eventually graduated, got recognized by someone in the company, moved up to middle management. Well, the janitor that works for Apple doesn't work for Apple. They work for an outsourced company where their wages are bid down, and they follow this person in a real poverty trap. They were working full time, but had to work extra jobs, weren't home for their kids, just the struggle every single day, the constant economic security. Well, this is stuff I don't have to imagine. When I came out of Yale Law School, I made a decision with my life. I'm from relatively affluent suburbs, but I decided to move into one of our nation's lowest income census tracts. The 2010 census has where I live at $14,000 in incomes. I'm surrounded by janitors, by cafeteria workers, by people who are nurses' assistants, who do dignified, important job, work full time, but are stuck in an economy that puts them at severe vulnerability to economic shocks, and often find it hard, especially in the New York City metropolitan area, in a high cost area. They really are in economic fragility. This is something that could begin to address some of that economic fragility as we look at the larger trends in our economy that in my generation are very different than when my dad came up. And so this is a good step that will help a lot of folks in a community like mine, where we don't mistake wealth with worth. There are people that play by the rules, work hard every single day, and still find themselves struggling to make ends meet. Well, this is a great way to go and make a difference in everyday people's lives. And again, the wonderful thing about this nation, despite the culture of contempt that often has Americans turning against each other along partisan lines, as opposed to turning to each other, like I think Senator Young and myself are in this case, is that we all share this common value, is that people that work hard, that really have grit and determination in this country should be able to thrive, have a high sense of well-being. And again, I think this is a way that we have found on common sort of ground to get our country more closer to that ideal that we have. More work to do, but this is something that is a no-brainer. It's profoundly pragmatic, And I think it portends of possibility, if I don't go too far into alliteration, but it portends of good possibilities for more work ahead to make the American dream accessible to everybody from rural Indiana to urban New Jersey. I think this is going to help a lot of folks.
Thank you both for your time today. But the words grit and determination also apply to what it takes to actually govern a divided country. And so I thank you both for your grit and determination. And as you know, we're of course eager to kind of help you see this thing across the line. And I expect many of the people online today are now more engaged as well. So appreciate you both, and we will see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I appreciate Senator Young dealing with a state like New Jersey, which I hear has better high school basketball than Indiana.
All right. Easy.
Always a burden. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
appreciate you all. All right. Thanks, Corey.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.